Where is the proof? Once again, Georgia's Secretary of State's office is urging critics of the presidential election results to put up or shut up as the state looks into more than 100 complaints and concerns. 11 Alive, John Sherrick in Midtown Atlanta on the story for us tonight. John?
Put up or shut up, to paraphrase the Georgia Secretary of State's office, challenging the Rudy Giulianis of these presidential election disputes. Gabriel Sterling of the Georgia Secretary of State's office says there is still so much disinformation about the presidential election in Georgia.
It's being perpetuated by the President of the United States.
Sterling says President Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, for one, was being irresponsible when Giuliani testified Thursday at a State House committee on possible elections fraud in Fulton County. Giuliani again repeating disproven claims that a video caught an elections worker manipulating absentee ballots, and worse.
Look at that woman. Look at her taking those ballots out. Look at them scurrying around with the ballots. Nobody in the room, hiding around. They look like this. They look like they're passing out dope.
No one has provided a shred, a scintilla of evidence that signatures weren't matched. No one. They made the allegation repeatedly, but there's zero evidence that that's the case. No one has made anything to say the voting system is in some way not working properly. Let's keep that in mind. There's been zero evidence to that effect. None.
Still, Georgia's Speaker of the House, David Ralston, said minutes later that the election was a mess and the Secretary of State needs a different boss.
It's time in Georgia that we look at an alternative way of electing our Secretary of State. Frankly, I like the option of having the General Assembly elect that individual for a set term.
At that, the Deputy Secretary of State told us in a clear power grab, Ralston and the Trump campaign want to give the General Assembly the power to select winners of elections and violate the will of the people.